I think when I first read that and he said, Murray said it's impossible to see the barn, I think I took that literally, like you can't see it because everyone's in their way, like blocking their view.
Yeah.
And I think Benny thought that as well. Speaking of like social influence, I'm not sure if I said that and then you thought that about the barn as well or not. Or maybe I was just misunderstanding.
Actually,
I thought you couldn't see the barn.
I think we might be right. I think we might be right, to be honest.
No, dog.
I'm not sure. Anyway.
No, there's like an elevated lookout point above the barn from which point everyone's taking photos. I mean, a barn is a big object. Imagine how many people there'd have to be like clustered around it to literally not be able to see it.
Well, it's the most photographed barn, dude. What do you expect?
Welcome to Do You Even Lit? This is a book club for former STEM tragics who are trying to get a little bit of culture by dipping our toes into the world of literature. My name is Rich, and I'm very happy to be joined today, as usual, by my co-host Cam, coming to you all the way from Melbourne, Australia. Cam, g'day, mate.
G'day, this is Cam here. Hoping I'm the last one to die out of the three of us today. Please don't forget to download and subscribe and make us happy as podcasters. And email any feedback to doyouevenlit@gmail.com, and that's you as just the letter U.
Yeah, like and subscribe. I'm just getting a radio report coming in. There's a great mass of hot air moving down from Canada, which I guess means that our third mic, Benny Chug, is in the house. What are we doing today, Benny?
Good day, fellas. All right, that was the one time I'm practicing an Australian accent on the pod. What's up, fellas? Yeah, today we're doing Don DeLillo's 1985 classic, White Noise, a postmodern meditation about death, technology, and the absurdity of academia and modern life. Quick takes, thumbs up, thumbs down. What'd you guys think?
Well, we got a silver star from Rich, don't we?
It was a silver star when I read it a few years ago. I'm changing my rating. There's going to be a new ceremony. Yeah, what'd you guys think?
Yeah, tentative thumbs up from me. I really enjoyed the reading experience. You know, we'll get into the characters and whatnot in a bit here, but actually just being in Jack Gladney's head throughout the book, I found to be a fairly delightful experience. And the book was quite easy to read, very witty, very charming. I'm a little bit torn about how much I actually agree with and like what I take to be the overall thesis, and even sort of the main points that he was trying to make. I'm a little bit torn on in my own head, so I'm pretty excited to chat with you fellas today and kind of sort it out for myself, and then hopefully come away with, I think, just a more robust sense of what DeLillo was actually trying to do here. But overall, very enjoyable book. So let me just do a very quick gloss on how the book begins and intro some of the characters. So the book is written from Jack Gladney's perspective. Gladney is a professor at the college on the hill, as they call it, in Blacksmith, which we're told is some sort of Midwestern, perhaps East Coast town in the US somewhere. Just from the vibes of the book, it feels like probably somewhere, maybe upstate New York, maybe Pennsylvania, maybe Ohio, somewhere around there.
You've triangulated it very, very nicely.
Oh, we need the GeoGuessr guy. Read like the first sentence of the novel and be like, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia.
Okay, so Jack Gladney is an academic. He lives with his family, which is a bit of a mishmash of various families. So he lives with his current wife, Babette. Each of them is on their fourth or fifth marriage.
Yeah, I think fourth.
They each have kids from previous marriages, and some of those kids live with them. So they have a little family. It's them and their four kids. They've actually had no natural kids together. So all of their kids are from previous.
Wait, isn't Wilder their shared kid? No?
Nah, I think the movie changes that detail. Richard telling on himself.
Sorry.
Did not read the book. No, I think Wilder and Denise Babette's, and Steffi and Henrik Jack's. And I think there are other kids as well, right, that live with ex-wives and ex-husbands.
Okay, yeah. So it's a Brady Bunch kind of situation.
Yeah. Modern Family, Brady Bunch.
Yeah. So Babette is Jack's wife. She teaches posture to the elderly. Then they have the son Henrik, who has a lot of opinions, perhaps even like mildly autistic or something. You get the vibe of sort of a smart teenage pessimist, nihilist, someone who's sort of likes to question everything, but is doing so in a somewhat sophisticated way, at least for that age. Then there's Denise and Wilder, who's the youngest. So Jack is a professor of Hitler studies at the college on the hill, which is a field that he introduced to academia by himself. And this is sort of how he's become famous in that world. So now there are thousands of scholars across the world studying Hitler studies. There are people like his friend Murray who would like to follow in his footsteps with other figures. So his friend Murray wants to start a field of Elvis Presley studies. And so the first third of the book, roughly, is following this family around both at home and Jack at work. And it's sort of a long disquisition on the absurdity of especially academic life. How silly some of the stuff is there, and we'll probably get more into that. But something that comes up pretty early in the book is a fear of death. So both Jack and Babette talk to each other about how afraid they are to die, hence Cam's opening statements about death. And neither of them wants to be the one to die first, but they lie about it. Yeah. And so, Cam, you want to talk a bit about like the paranoia and stuff that goes along with these feelings of death?
You know, Babette, the wife, takes a drug and we're not sure what it was, and she's lying about it, and something seems a bit off kilter about that. And there are other things like, you know, there's some neighbors went missing and you sort of don't know the Treadwells, and you don't really know what happened to them, and the police get like a psychic to find them, and the psychic takes them to a factory that's cocaine in there. And I think at one point Jack says the American mystery deepens. And I suppose the other setting is just the supermarket is like the kind of town square for them, and that's often where they go and meet Jack's friend Murray, who is always chiming out about some theory.
Yeah, how much did you guys like this first part of the book? I mean, so we should say, you know, up until page roughly 100, nothing much is happening besides sort of following Jack around. I'm torn about how much I like this part. I mean, so we should keep in mind that this was written in 1985, right? So much has been written since then, sort of as parodies of how absurd academia can be. And there's lots of those kind of elements here. And I doubt DeLillo was one of the first people to do this, but it didn't feel especially novel to me in the sense that DeLillo was doing something here that like we've never seen before. And it was done in a relatively funny, charming way. So I didn't have a huge problem with it, but I also didn't find it incredibly illuminating.
That was my first take as well, was that this is that thing we've talked about of reading the history of philosophy backwards, where ideas that were original at the time can seem a bit stale when you've been bombarded with them for decades like we have, and you go back to the source and it doesn't really hit as hard. But I'm way more bullish on this book. I actually think it is a really good book after all. So
just quickly, so what would be a potential stale idea in this book?
The staleness for me is around like what I at first took to be a sort of anti-consumerism message of how we're all bombarded by stimuli and ruled by television, and we worship at the supermarket, and everyone loves to sort of balm all their suffering through shopping and purchases and material possessions and distractions of that nature, which is like, you know, it's kind of true, but it's not like an interesting observation to me. And I think it's massively overstated in this book. But now I think I was naive about that and I wasn't reading carefully enough. And he's actually sort of sending up that very notion itself and deliberately being like hyperbolic about it. So the passage earlier on in the book, which I think hooked me the first time I read it, which I still really like, is which gives like a sense of the overall, the deeper themes, which I think make this book actually worthy, is when Murray, Jack's weird ass professor friend, takes Jack out to, or vice versa, Jack takes Murray out to see the most photographed barn in America, which is this presumably picturesque barn. It's about 20 miles out of town. And as you approach it, there's all these signs saying like the most photographed barn this way. You get closer and there's all these people with their tripods set up taking photos of the barn. There's a kiosk with a guy selling postcards and souvenirs and so on. They're standing there watching the people watching, watching people watching. I'll just read a little excerpt from it. So, no one sees the barn, Murray said finally. Once you've seen the signs about the barn, it becomes impossible to see the barn. We're not here to capture an image, we're here to maintain one. Every photograph reinforces the aura. Can you feel it, Jack? An accumulation of nameless energies. Being here is a kind of spiritual surrender. We see only what the others see. We've agreed to be part of a collective perception. It literally colors our vision. Another silence ensued. They are taking pictures of taking pictures, he said. Which I think is a great passage. And I was initially thinking that it's impossible to see the barn is just kind of a silly statement to make. It's like this overwrought thing about signaling or consumerism or something. But now I think there's actually a there based in part on something you were saying off mic, Cam. So do you want to lay some sort of theory on us of what he's actually sort of referring to there?
Just quickly, it's funny. I think when I first read that and he said, Murray said it's impossible to see the barn, I think I took that literally, like you can't see it because everyone's in their way, like blocking their view.
Yeah.
And I think Benny thought that as well. Or speaking of like social influence, I'm not sure if I said that and then you thought that about the barn as well or not. Or maybe I was just misunderstanding.
Actually,
but I thought you couldn't see the barn.
I think we might be right. I think we might be right, to be honest.
No, dog.
I'm not sure. Anyway.
No, there's like an elevated lookout point above the barn from which point everyone's taking photos. I mean, a barn is a big fucking object. Imagine how many people there'd have to be like clustered around it to literally not be able to see it.
Well, it's the most photographed barn, dude. What do you expect?
Yeah, okay. Well, maybe I'm sure the view is partly obscure because you got all these people in there. But I think what he's saying is you can't see the barn for what it is. Like the barn now has changed. So it used to be this idyllic barn, and that's why it became presumably this famous kind of barn. And now it's kind of a different entity. It has a different essence. I think like the Mona Lisa is something similar. You can't really see the Mona Lisa for what it is now because it's been irreversibly changed by its status in culture. And you literally, struggle to see it with all these people taking photos of it.
I don't know. I actually kind of disagree with that reading. I think saying that there was sort of a base reality barn there to begin with, and then it got famous because it is presumably really nice in some way, is not what he wants us to take away from this. I take it that this barn is like socially constructed by all the people partaking in this ritual of going to take pictures of it. Yeah. I don't think there like is sort of an a priori barn without people. Like I think this is like, and I guess we'll get into this with the background on postmodernism, but part of the postmodern critique is that it's not base reality and then we're adding layers of abstraction onto this as we engage in social rituals. It's that the social rituals are creating base reality itself. And so there is no barn there without all these people. There's no base barn. And this is obviously this is what's hard about postmodernism when taken to the nth degree. It's like, clearly if you're any sort of ontological realist, then you want to push back against that. But anyway, yeah, this is why I'm struggling a bit with how much I like the actual theories of the book, because I can't tell to what extent DeLillo is fully embracing this sort of postmodern critique of there being sort of base reality at all and not. So anyway, with that, maybe Cam, go on to some postmodern details.
Us, the STEM tragics, can give a 101 of postmodernism.
This is going to go well, I'm sure.
I mean, so one thing to answer your question before, what I think about this book, like the one thing this book did for me, I'm not even sure if it was this book or if it was happening anyway, but I think it slightly raised the status of postmodernism, or at least some ideas in postmodernism, which maybe I'd been underrated a bit before that. And, this is mainly because I'm someone, and I think you guys are as well, but someone who, grew up intellectually in this kind of neo-atheist empiricist tradition, reading lots of Dawkins and Steven Pinker and the like, and, who are all pretty good, but and who all trash on postmodernism. And so I always had this reflexive, reaction just to cast aside like anything that could plausibly give the label of postmodern. And there's kind of the slight irony here of like maybe not understanding the ideas fully and sort of just treating it as this kind of symbol word that you hear and you cast aside. And the problem is, like, a lot of it is kind of crunk, like, gobbledygook BS. And even the good stuff is often admittedly like paradoxical and contradictory and like hard to understand. And I also think with postmodernism, there's this potential dynamic where like the first order postmodernists maybe had something to say, and then that gets diluted with like second order people that they learn from who are maybe less talented, and because it's the stuff that's hard to understand, and then you kind of lose the meaning, and then it kind of is just left as BS, and then you kind of get third and fourth order postmodernists, now it gets so intertwined with like anti-Western ideas and stuff as well, and politics, and politics tends to melt people's brain anyway. But so you mix that in with contradictory stuff, and it's probably not a great recipe. But anyway, postmodernism, like, I mean, most people have heard of this and roughly know what it is. And in general, I think it's this vague set of ideas that tend to point towards there being like no universal truth. This idea that maybe the society we live in is like socially constructed. But like you also have postmodernism in literature, which may be touching on these themes, but also maybe sometimes is better called something like metafiction. It's fiction that has like recursive elements or intertextual elements or like meta aspects that like call to attention the fact that we're literally in the act of reading a story, or like the storyteller itself has certain motives and has a project, and so it's just bringing that to the forefront. And I think in postmodern literature there's like a million, there's like several different guys called Barth, or like some variation of Barth, that all seem to be like father figures in postmodern literature, which kind of feels like some sort of ironic joke that you'd find in DeLillo or a Rapincha novel or something.
There's only one base reality Barth, and the others are Simulacra.
Yeah. There's Barth Elm, and then there's Barth with an S. Yeah. And then there's this thinker called, which I've been saying, pronouncing incorrectly off mic, Baudrillard. How's that, boys?
Nice.
Nailed it. Who I think you can see his ideas potentially in this novel. He was famous for this idea of the simulacra, which is just this idea that there's different layers to reality. So you have like layer one, which is, well, I assume like layer zero, potentially. I mean, some people question if this exists, but it's kind of ground level reality. And then layer one is trying to represent that. So that might be a photo of a building. And then you have layer two is this perversion of reality. So, you're still trying to represent it, but you're being hyperbolic or exaggerating something. So that might be think of a historical movie or something, which has a bit of a narrative and story to it. Then the third layer is this pretense of reality. So it's sort of no longer attached to anything real underneath, is my understanding, but it's kind of presenting as it is. I think one example that maybe even Baudrillard used is there's this kind of fake town in Disneyland. I forget what it's called, but like it's meant to represent this idyllic kind of quintessential American town, but like that town didn't exist.
Well, can you relate it to the barn, which is what we started talking about?
I think the barn would be like layer 3, maybe. But I mean, it was a barn. Well, barn might be, okay, quickly. So layer 4 is what he calls total simulation. And that's when you've just totally lost grip of reality and everything's based on all this fake stuff, really. So it's a little hard for me to determine what's in layer 3, what's in layer 4, because I'm thinking of like, these days, like reality TV seems to be this like classic example of like this thing that's like presenting it. I mean, even in its fucking name, right? It's called reality TV. And we know it's like, it's all scripted and it's all this fake drama. It's constructing this kind of new reality, which, is super popular. And this even bleeds into, non-TV. It just bleeds into social media and like everyone's Instagram and TikTok and stuff of we're all presenting, there's this effect that everyone complains about where, people presenting a non-real life on their Instagram. And of course, in this novel, we get, as we mentioned, we get a bunch of advertising, which also potentially has this impact. Coca-Cola are selling us happiness, but they're really just selling us a sugary drink. I mean,
Sugary drink makes me happy, man.
Yeah. I think Diet Coke might be as close.
You can speak.
Ultimate
you can talk.
Serene happiness. Yeah.
Can I try and like layer the layers onto the barn? So let's say it's not denying physical reality, I think, which maybe helps to assuage some of your concerns, Benny. So base zero is there's an actual building. It's actually a barn. level 1 is someone makes a representation of the barn, so they take a photo of it. Level 2 is that they distort it in some way, so maybe they put a filter on it, make it look particularly picturesque so that their Insta gets more likes, or they can sell a better postcard or whatever it might be, right? Layer 3, was that layer? That's layer.
You said layer 2. No,
but that's meant to be layer 3,
2.
right?
But layer 1's photo, layer 2 is a filtered photo.
Yeah. And then layer 3 is the highest layer?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't understand that then. But I was thinking the distinction is when
We'll keep going though.
Well, okay, so as far as I can remember from what you were saying, the distinction is when we have symbols for things and they have reference, they refer to something in the actual world. So the word barn is a symbol that refers to an actual object. A photo of a barn is a symbol that refers to an actual object. But where it crosses over into layer 4 is where you have symbols that don't have reference. They only refer back to other symbols. They're not grounded in anything. So I think arguably the most photographed barn in the world as an abstraction is a symbol, and it has a circular logic to it. So when you talk about that, you're no longer talking about any actual thing. You're talking about a socially constructed idea that this is the most photographed barn that is only maintains itself by virtue of this kind of flywheel effect where people keep taking photos of it because they're buying into that abstraction. So in some sense, it seems silly because there is an obvious referent there. But I think if you sort of take the abstract concept, the most photographed barn in America, then you can see how that is a purely symbolic representation that is completely socially mediated, right?
Mm-hmm. I sometimes think of meme stocks now seem to have this kind of Baudrillardian kind of thing going on. Rich from the finance background would be better at talking to this, but the idea that there are kind of fundamentals, right? There's kind of a there, but now you have this idea of these meme stocks, which are totally sort of socially fabricated in everybody's attitudes and behavior, and can all pop in this bubble. But it also is this new reality, right? That is no longer connected to the original, perhaps. Well, I've also seen porn talked about in this sense as well. I mean, you first have sex or making love, then you might have it in a movie or something where some things are exaggerated or taken out, and then you get to porn, and you can totally lose sight of what was originally in making love in real life. But it becomes this whole new thing now, which everyone's obsessed with, and potentially even becomes the main thing, and goes back to affecting base reality. These things do as well, which DeLillo plays with in the book later on.
Yeah, the meme stock thing is a good example because it's completely divorced from fundamentals, and it is sort of it's not an unheard of phenomenon, but it is a really good example of it where it's just pure reflexivity where something is popular. The other go-to example people say is stuff like, why is Paris Hilton famous, or why is Kim K famous? They're famous for being famous, and that eventually just becomes a self-fulfilling thing that is divorced from any of whatever the properties were that catalyzed that process from beginning. Now it just exists as an endless symbolic circle jerk, right? Where you can just have TikToks and videos and news articles and whatever that are just all riffing off one another, and they don't even need to make contact with ground reality again. Or as you point out, sometimes they can change ground reality again. They can actually have effects that ripple sort of back down the chain, which for some reason stuck in my mind. I remember we talked about way back in the day about memeing big asses into reality. And
yeah, that was the Welbeck, right?
Yeah, it's the same kind of a thing.
That is potentially true, right? Yeah, it becomes this psyop that potentially didn't used to exist in the early 2000s and comes in as big, and it's potentially waning out based on this kind of social reality.
Well, so here's a question for you guys. One possible reading of DeLillo is that he's mourning the loss of this base layer of reality, and he thinks we've become too caught up in the simulation level, in these levels of abstraction. He's mourning the fact that the reality has just become whatever is collectively agreed upon, mediated by technology and capitalism and institutions. And another reading is that he's not mourning this fact. He's just pointing out that this is how it always is. And, everyone's behavior and social reality in general is always mediated by, collective agreement of how things work. And these abstract layers of expectations that we're placing onto reality. And for DeLillo, often this comes from what I think he'd call like late stage capitalism, and sort of this is where the consumerist critique and stuff comes in. But to what extent, I guess, do you guys agree that he's sort of, I guess just mourning the loss of the base layer of reality? Like, to what extent is the barn scene, for instance, pointing out that, like, this is absurd that we all keep photographing this barn, and that we're sort of caught in this collective hallucination of the most photographed barn in America? Or is he just saying everything is like this and this is just how the world works?
I think the barn scene shows it's almost it's manifest that it's absurd. But in terms of his description elsewhere, like the book's pointing out that a lot of this simulation type effect is coming from consumerism. It's coming from advertising, and he is more ambivalent about that at times. I think he's pointing out the absurdism of it, but it seems to be doing so in a way with it seems to be quite warm and quite gentle with us. Like, he obviously appreciates it to some extent, I think, and America itself. And Murray J. Siskand, he has these theories, and he's quite enamored by it. He's totally lost in it, and he thinks, car crashes in American movies are like the last avant-garde. Or maybe he actually said advertising in supermarkets was the last avant-garde.
He loves the supermarket.
Yeah, he loves the supermarket, and he refers to everything as like psychic data, and he views it as quite spiritual. It's the last kind of spiritual thing we have, I think, in his mind. So to go back to like contradictions and stuff, it seems to be pointing out how absurd and soulless this is, and we'll get later to potentially the effects on our attachment to life, and also, a little bit of warmth towards it as well, I think.
What about you, Rich? Any thoughts there?
It's sort of, it hinges for me on whether DeLillo believes the stuff that Murray is spouting, or whether Murray is meant to be a mouthpiece for stupid nonsense, basically. And if it's the latter, I like it. And if it's the former, I don't like it, because Murray is talking absolute shit, in my opinion. And it's actually really hard. I tried hard to try and extract some meaning out of his monologue about the supermarket as like some kind of wonderful waiting space before death and its connection to Tibetan Buddhism and all this kind of stuff. And I think it's just nonsense. Like, I don't think people love going to the supermarket and are transfixed by all of the buying possibilities and find it refreshing. And that's not my experience at all. And so I think it works if it's like a critique of that view. In other words, it's like, it's more clever than I thought it was. It's not just like a first order consumerism bad type thing. It's like, I feel like it's also making fun of the opposite position of that a little bit as well, like by hamming it all the way up. And it's like the whole thing gives me a vibe of like amused cultural anthropologist looking out upon the way that humans are and the incredibly elaborate rationalizations and copes that they come up with for things. But if he believes some of the arguments that he puts in his character's mouth, then I'm not really a huge fan of that.
I was just going to echo that. I definitely think a part of Murray's theories and later theories as well around death, Don DeLillo's actually pointing out how absurd academia can get, in this kind of ivory tower, emphasis on theory, that you lose touch with the world. But also, like, I don't know, you say you don't relate to the supermarket, maybe the supermarket itself you don't, but I can certainly imagine people, at least, if not myself, who get a lot of utility and almost like God-shaped hole type stuff from going shopping. I got this one family member, this cousin, who like, it is like this cope for her life. Is like she goes shopping, she gets like the latest clothes and stuff. She's seemingly trying to feel something.
Yeah, maybe it's just like a gender-coded thing or something, because I hate shopping, like I don't enjoy going. It's not my idea of a good time.
Yeah, so I think for sure Murray's supposed to be sort of a reductio ad absurdum of this view, but I'm not sure that means it's sufficient to say that DeLillo is therefore like coming out on the other side and saying that if you take this view too far, it's it's absurd. Yeah, I think he's trying to point out maybe that we're actually not so different from Murray. Like, it's easy to look at Murray and think that this guy has totally lost his mind and is completely divorced from reality. But in fact, we're all doing that, whether it's like fear of death or obsession with metrics, or how we change ourselves to fit in with our professions like Jack does, right? And so I think he's maybe using Murray as sort of this mirror back onto yourself that exaggerates some of your positions in manifestly absurd ways. But yet, when you look at many of your own behaviors, I think DeLillo would want to say that you're basically doing the same thing. Like, I think no character comes out of this book looking like they're sort of more attached to reality than Murray when you really analyze it.
Well, I mean, it's only because Murray seems like weirdly psychologically resilient, whereas Jack is an absolute wreck and is just like lurching from failure to failure. I think like Murray is reaching. He's really reaching. And maybe that's why I feel like it's not a shallow consumerist critique, because Murray is reaching and working so hard to try and transform this banal experience into something that gives some kind of meaning to life. And I think what DeLillo is saying is that is also just like a silly cope. But it's not necessarily a critique of capitalism per se. It's just that that's one other avenue that you could pursue in your attempt to distract yourself from your impending death, or living in a non-perfect world, or something like that. It's one of many things that people find elaborate ways to theorize about and wax lyrical about, but all of them are making the same fundamental mistake, Murray included. But Murray's not a pathetic figure because it's not causing him a great amount of psychic harm. He's just happily living that particular delusion. So good for him. But but Jack is not happy. He takes comfort from Murray temporarily, I think, during those talks, but I don't think he manages to make it stick.
So just to quickly bring it back to this idea of simulation or socially mediated reality, because we've talked about the barn. So this is like chapter 2 or 3, and it kind of stands on its own. But there is this question of how strong is that a theme in the book? There's a few other examples. This idea that what's important is media comes up a few times. So Henrik, the spurgy son, who's smart, is playing this male chess game with a serial killer, or maybe not quite a serial killer, but a convicted murderer. And he's really sort of nonplussed about the relationship. But he was saying that the murderer himself regrets not killing someone more famous, and he should have been an assassin or something. Because it's almost like, what's the point? He had this view of what's the point if he wasn't famous. And there's another scene as well when Jack picks up one of his other daughters who doesn't live with him, and she's just been on the plane, and some other people have been on the plane, and I think they were complaining about their plane had almost been in a crash. It was this, or I don't know, I can't quite remember. It was strong turbulence or something, and they got off, and again they wanted media there to sort of interview them and
validate the experience.
Yeah, validate them. And I think his daughter even says, she's like, man, they went through that for nothing. And it's funny because it's absurd and we laugh at it, but I relate to it in some aspects of my life, and I'm sure you guys do. But it's this idea of you go out to a restaurant and people differ to the extent of this, but a lot of people need a photo of the nice food, and if you don't do that, it hasn't been worth it. Or when you go for a run and you don't, there's this thing, if you don't record it, you're like, what's the point?
If it's not on Strava, it didn't happen.
Yeah. I know. It's almost more important to have done a bad run for your kind of health and fitness goals, but that's impressive on Strava, than the opposite, I find. And
you subtweeting me, bro?
Yeah.
Yeah, we know you didn't actually run that half marathon, Rich. You were in a little ice cream cart driving around the course just fast enough.
I literally was
running.
I was having this thought this morning because I ran up this little hill thing a bunch of times this morning, and I put it on Strava, and I got local legend, which means I've done that segment the most times, and I was like, yeah, I'm the local legend. And I was thinking, What if there's a bunch of other people out there who've done it more than me, but they just don't use like a Garmin and Strava and all that stuff? And it's like, it almost really doesn't exist. Like, I am the local legend. That's all that there is there. Those people might as well be ghosts or dead or something. Like, I don't care if they've done it more than I have, because they're not real to me.
Yeah, no, exactly. So that is a very relatable thing. The other way this theme, I think, is represented in this novel is the famous quote, Airborne toxic event, where, you know, the children are starting to show symptoms, but it's the symptoms of this air pollution event that's just happened being announced on the radio, and those are changing. I think it starts off saying vomiting, and then like Denise, the daughter, she immediately goes to vomit. And then after that, it says sweaty palms, and someone's got sweaty palms. And then it says deja vu, and then someone's got deja vu. And Henrik, the son, jokes, well, doesn't even joke, I think he says seriously, you know, you've got the wrong symptom relative to what the radio's announced. And then the final one says convulsions and maybe miscarriages. And Jack wonders if his youngest daughter, who's 11 or 12, like, could she potentially have a miscarriage just from hearing it on the radio? So he's not sure if these are real symptoms because they're happening immediately after the radio announced them, and it seems potentially psyop symptoms. But I think he wonders if one of the daughters has heard of deja vu, and so maybe it's a real thing or not. And again, this is something I think that we can relate to as well, you know, this idea of the placebo effect, of course, or the nocebo effect, or, you know, the media announcing, you know, what to think about a certain thing.
But just to backtrack for a sec, Cam, for context, the Airborne toxic event is like the big turning point of the novel. It's like the big central event where Jack's sort of low-level death fears become realized an actual possibility of being exposed to a deadly event. So it's like the big sort of important turning point for the novel where things start to go from abstract to very real.
Yeah, we should say the novel's sort of broken into three parts, and we've mostly just been talking about the first part, but the action really gets going in the second part, where there's an airborne toxic event. Like Cam was saying, you know, the family wakes up one morning and I think a train or something had tipped over. The news reports that there's this plume of smoke in the sky, and no one's sure what to make of it, and they're listening to the news unfold as they're eating breakfast, and the reports of the plume become, you know, more severe.
Black billowing cloud, it turns to.
Yeah, it's a plume, and then it's a black billowing cloud, and as the labels change, so too, as Cam was saying, do the symptoms, and the kids are having symptoms, the exact symptoms as sort of the news is unfolding. For sweaty palms, and then deja vu, etc. And finally they announced that we're calling it the Airborne toxic event, and it turns out that it was a sort of a chemical spill that spewed a bunch of toxic material into the sky, and it's really bad for you, and we're evacuating the neighborhood, and the family's in total denial about this, and Jack is saying, you know, I'm a professor at a college, professors at colleges do not get evacuated from their homes in the middle of the morning when they're trying to eat breakfast from their family. There's absolutely no way this can happen.
I loved his initial reaction to his son Henrik. Henrik says, I think, like, what do you think, Dad? What's going to happen? He's just like, no, it's gonna move right past it. You know, it's total confabulation. Like, but it's a very natural reaction when things like this happen. You're like, don't worry about it.
Henrik's like, the wind could blow it, and he's like, no, the wind will move the other way.
Yeah. There's a large air mass heading down from Canada, so it's going to be all right.
Yeah, like the parents are denying it because they try to have like an early dinner and just like, which they're obviously having an early dinner to try and just normalize everything. Yeah, and then the siren's going and they're announcing you have to evacuate, and Henrik comes and tells, you know, we have to evacuate, and then the parents are sort of saying, you know, no, did they sound like a suggestion or how urgent?
Yeah.
But Henrik is almost like this foil for what the parents are doing. He kind of keeps sort of actually in there. Again, seems to be playing with this idea that like even something like a chemical spill of the, you know, the iodine derivative, iodine D, that's you know, definitely causes tumors in rats, and we're not quite sure what it does to humans yet. Like even something like that, you know, what we think about it could have an impact on our health, but it certainly has impact on everyone's reactions, right? So everyone's reacting to the radio announcements and the fire engine announcements, and then the whole town only evacuates when they've essentially been told to evacuate, and then they all suddenly rush out, and Jack gets exposed to it, right? I think.
Yeah, they got to fill up gas, and so he has to step outside the car and use the gas station for, I think, 2.5 minutes or something, and then later he's being examined, I guess, by one of the Simuvac employees who's reading him out the results from the computer, saying, you have a certain amount of this in your blood, and this will probably shorten your lifespan. But, the attendant himself is totally useless. He's only able to read out what's on the computer. And so he's, telling Jack, this will probably kill you earlier, or it might not, or it might not. And, Jack is trying to get details about how likely he is to die. This sort of really kicks off his psychological preoccupation with his own death. And he keeps this reality from Babette for a long time because he doesn't want her to worry that now he will in fact die first and leave her alone. And, just to going back what we were saying earlier in terms of social mediation and whatnot, it wasn't a fact for him that he was standing outside in this black billowing cloud that caused him to start worrying about death. It was really getting the sort of legible information about, these concrete numbers and concrete metrics that made him worry about death.
Yeah, but even then, are they concrete numbers, right? Because there's this really funny dialogue between him and the guy who's running the numbers for him where he's trying to push back on it and say, basically, what does this mean? Are you sure? And the guy running the tests can't actually point anything back to concrete reality. He keeps using symbols to refer to other symbols. So, Jack will say, well, how serious is it? And he'll say, well, you've got brackets and stars next to your name. Well, what does that mean?
What else do you want?
He keeps saying it's a situation. It means we've got a situation.
Yeah. And that's a really nice interplay because it's like the absurdity of it. He never grounds it back to you have an X% chance of this or that. It's just like computer says this, therefore that's bad. Why is that bad? Because computer says this. And, no one actually knows what is going on.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, it's not the details of the information, or it's not the veracity of the information itself. It's the fact that there just is information, that something is telling you something, and then you can't help but, even though he's sort of confused about it in the moment, he can't help sort of now ingesting that as to part of his personality, part of how he thinks about the world. It starts to infect his own psychology. Well, there were stars next to my name. That must be bad. No one else had stars next to their name. After the third part of the book, when they're sort of, it's back to normal and they're back home, he can't help but visit the doctor more and stuff because he feels like he says he feels physically completely normal. But this has really infected his psychology. Now he has to go get checkups every few months, and the doctor will say, "It's it's nice that you're coming in so often, but why is that?" And he says, "Well, I was exposed. I had the exposure of it. I had stars."
Well, at one point, I think he asked, he's like, "Is it coming up like you'd expect I was exposed to this type of chemical?" And the doctor's like, "Well, have you been exposed?" He's like, well, is it?
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, exactly. Also, just really quickly, just going back to the simulation type stuff, when they go to this evacuation camp, and Benny mentioned that the guy that's running the numbers from the computer is part of a Simuvac organization, which is this big acronym that stands for simulated evacuation. So it's this company that runs simulated evacuation. So Jack's first thinks, what is this a simulation? Should I be worried? And he's like, no, this is a real event, but we're a simulation organization, and we're using this real disaster to prepare for our simulated disaster we're going to do in a few weeks.
And he's mad that reality hasn't neatly conformed to their simulation.
Yeah.
The bodies are in the wrong places.
Yeah, and it's just all a bit more chaotic. And it's not actually that realistic to an actual simulation. But we have to work with what we got. And then later on, when they go home, because they're all allowed to go home after a few weeks, the Simuvac is running simulated evacuations, and Jack's kids are playing roles. And I think Steffi is sort of lying down dead.
And what's funny with those roles is how seriously they take them, right? And how sort of unseriously they had taken the real evacuation, and didn't really feel the need to do anything there. But then, Jack is I think he's trying to get Steffi to come do something with him or come pick up Babette or something. And she's like, no, I can't leave. They need me lying on the sidewalk here.
Yeah. I think she was going to go visit her dad in New Mexico or something. And she's like, no, yeah, I need to do the simulated evacuation.
She's like, I have a simulation scheduled for that weekend. I can't go to Mexico. Are you crazy?
Yeah, so this goes back to the power of social reality, which I just want to sort of hammer one more time. Going back to that really funny dinner scene where they're just like clinking cutlery and past the salt while there's sirens in the background, which is why I'm sympathetic to the idea that Baudrillard is right in some sense, or Don DeLillo is right, is that we know that our perception of reality is wrong. We know that our visual perception is not how the world really is, and so on. I think there genuinely is a deeper sense in which we are like divorced from physical reality by our nature as social animals, and the way it manifests is in these crazy behaviors where everyone's in like this sticky equilibrium where the dinner table equilibrium is nothing can go wrong, everything is fine. And then you get these sudden dissolutions of social reality, and everyone sort of like floods to inhabit the new social reality as if the old one never existed, or in a very sort of inconsistent way that you wouldn't expect if you were just like reasoning through everything and trying to calculate risks and so on. And it made me think of, I mean, we've had like some modern examples with COVID and some of the riots and stuff like that. But a more neutral example is, which I wonder if it inspired Don DeLillo, is there's this famous experiment where there's these people waiting in a doctor's waiting room and they start piping in some smoke through one of the vents. And everyone is a conspirator except for the test subject. And they just basically wait to see how long before the test subject will leave the room. But the conspirators just sit there and keep reading their magazines and so on. And it's fucking crazy. Like almost all the people, or like some very high proportion of them, just sit there while the room fills with smoke. They don't they're looking around confused, but they don't take action. They don't pull the fire alarm. They don't, because they are trying to calibrate what their reaction ought to be based on the average reaction of the people around them. And they are disregarding the physical reality and the sort of critical thinking, reasoning skills, which would tell them there's a fire, raise the alarm, get out.
So your point is, sorry, carry on.
No, go.
Well, I suppose your point, I think, is that, this is rational and expected a lot of the time to calibrate social reality will be impacted by it. Is that right?
Well, my first point is just that this is a real phenomenon, like absolutely, and it's bizarrely powerful, more than we might care to believe because we think that we are reasonable and rational. And but yeah, you're right. Like the other thing I thought might be important to do is just like explain why that it's actually good and adaptive that we live in social reality for the most of the time. So like the tendency is to focus on examples of when it goes wrong, and it often does go horribly wrong when you have like status. Well, okay, there's the status signaling cascade type stuff, like the fact that everyone wants to see the Mona Lisa. No one gives a fuck about the empty galleries full of wonderful art next door. I think that's like more or less harmless. It's like annoying, but who cares? And then there's the really bad dynamics like this where people are just, all lemmings going off a cliff together because they're all looking from side to side, trying to calibrate their reactions based on other people, which has that reflexive element, which is extremely dangerous. But most of the time it works great because thinking hard and reasoning and so on, A, is like costly and takes time and effort and so on. And B, like often you have to actually experiment and try things to figure out what is dangerous or what is safe or how you should behave. And it's way, way more effective to just copy the consensus position. Like as a starting point, copying the consensus is a great idea, as a base starting point for how to be in life. It's not a mistake. It's not like an evolutionary aberration. We are social animals, and it's like a big part of why we succeed is because we have this ability to learn through mimesis of what are the things worth pursuing and what are the things worth avoiding without having to actually inject yourself with this particular venom or put your head in the lion's jaws or whatever, right? You can just like copy off. There's some great quip about it, which is like, only a fool makes mistakes, or only a fool learns from his own mistakes. The wise man learns from everyone else's, basically.
Yeah, sure. I suppose it needs to be paired with this kind of rational calibration a lot of time, which maybe is demonstrated by Henrik during everyone's total delegation to authorities or the media as to what to do.
It needs to be paired with some sort of theory or recognition of when people are mimicking. I mean, there's correct circumstances in which to be mimicking people, and then there's incorrect circumstances, right? And you need to try and form a theory of when it's incorrect circumstances and when mimicking is just happening because of pure social signaling, and that like you're not actually following the wisdom of other people having learnt stuff. You're just in some like ideological echo chamber or something and just like doing things for norm's sake or signal's sake or, you know, some other sake besides actually tracking reality. You can go too far in either direction. And, you know, probably like something like the Bay Area rationalists would be an example of a group of people that continually questions cultural wisdom. And this has let them be ahead of the curve on many things, and then also make some like pretty big mistakes. And then you can have groups that are just way too conformist, right? And then sort of never question the status quo and aren't risk seeking enough and will never get big payoffs because of that. And so the trick, I think, is to form like an accurate theory of in what domains, following the crowd is going to be useful and in what domains it's not.
I mean, there's also, even with following the crowd, there's this question of like, is this kind of natural grassroots voice of the people type movement, or is this kind of this psyop from the elites that like how much is it based on like real preferences? What does it mean to have like a real kind of ground level preference that's your own versus a potentially psyoped preference or you know, psyoped symptom, and like, does that matter? Like, because you kind of point out in some sense, you know, it becomes your new preference and it's kind of as quote real as your previous kind of real preference, but like in some sense it feels fake and divorced from what's actually true. And I'm just thinking now in terms of like consuming media or something, everyone can be psyoped to think like a piece of art. Well, even that Mona Lisa example, like we probably overrate the Mona Lisa, but like, you know, just whatever latest director or latest author or something, everyone can be psyoped that's really good, and you can. And maybe people truly like it, but like, I think it potentially gets divorced from actual quality, perhaps if it's based on these dynamics. And you'd hope that, you know, a true preference would hopefully be based on kind of rational deliberation of quality.
Yeah, the traditional dividing line for like good mimesis versus bad mimesis is around acquisition. So like if you are interested in like learning versus acquisition. So if you're learning skills via mimesis, that's good, and learning like habits and practices that are useful without having to understand exactly why. It's a very cheap, easy way to learn. But the acquisitive mimesis is like the idea of, you know, if you've seen small children, you don't want this toy until this other kid wants it. And now you want it more than anything in the world. And it's like a very primal instinct for this. It's like the backfiring of the same behavioral trait, right? And it lasts all the way through to adulthood, where you end up with preferences which you have inherited based on liking things because other people like them. And that can totally misfire. Like all of the stuff around you want to drive a Lambo and have some like particular McMansion or some style of life. I think when people interrogate that closely, or when they get there and realize that it still doesn't make them happy, they'll realize that their acquisitive impulses have sort of led them astray. And it leads people to compete in basically what I would call negative sum games. Yeah. So the way that I've drawn it up before is like, what is the game you're playing? Is it positive sum or is it negative sum? So when I'm on Strava, and maybe it gives me a little bit of motivation to work a bit harder or just do the thing in general, which is good for my health, I'm playing a positive sum game, and I don't particularly care that I'm sort of doing a thing because I think other people also think it's good on some level. But if I am, you know, trying to buy like a Rolex, even though I don't care about watches and I know nothing about the collector craft or anything like that, I'm just trying to show off. I'm maybe, you know, let's say I'm putting myself in debt, or I'm, jeopardizing some investment opportunity or something, then that's fucking stupid, and that's like a negative sum game that I should not play at all.
Well, I mean, the other idea that seems to be with Baudrillard is like, can this new kind of fake reality, your examples before of, the smoke coming in the room, but you can kind of think of, like, if you viewed like a lot of politics as like this kayfabe, like, can that then change reality as well and like become the only reality? That seems to be this idea as well, which I'm sort of less sure of, and it's harder to be concrete about. We don't have to dwell on this too long because we want to move on to the other major theme in this book, death. The way I'll lead into it is, I think DeLillo seems to be saying that the reason perhaps we're in this media-saturated reality or because everyone has this strong anxiety of death. And perhaps the form of distraction or escape is via consumerism, or I think, Benny, you were going to maybe talk about the fear of death as the driving impulse of all humanity.
Yeah, I mean, I think an interesting question as it relates to this book is whether the fear of death of the characters of Jack and Babette in particular is primitive in the sense that it exists independently of their environment and the influences, or to what extent it itself is influenced by their family, the news, the events around them, others, the culture, etc. And I'm actually not sure where I come down on that question. I guess, yeah, before I go on, maybe, do you guys have strong opinions one way or the other on that?
No. Partly because, I mean, I don't have the fear of death as well, so I haven't pondered on it too much.
Bunch of pussies running around scared of death.
Well, not even that. I mean, it's funny because I'm the type of person I think would be primed for it. Like, I often can overthink things and get stuck in these recursive loops. For some reason, I don't really think about death. I understand the horror of it, like the horror of the silence, or, as he describes, potentially this white noise of death. And, and as Jack Gladney, I think, says it to Murray at one point, and like, we only have this vague understanding of what it even means or what it even is, which makes it a whole lot more scary. Like, I kind of get that intellectually. I just I don't get anxious about it day to day. I pretty much never think about it. Like, I think about death less than, I don't know, my mum thinks about Roman Empire. Like, it's not on my mind. Like, I sometimes get anxious about sleep before a big day's work, and something my partner even jokes, like, when I finally die on my graveyard, I'll be like, finally not worried about sleep.
I'm going to quote Murray to you. We all fear death to some extent. Those who claim otherwise are lying to themselves, shallow people.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, so that's the whole thesis, right? Does everyone... I mean, do you guys think about death, or do you have some form of death anxiety? I mean, I don't hope to bring this out in you as well. Speaking of socially mediated.
Benny, you go first.
Sure, yeah. Cam, I'm very much like you. I don't have the sort of inbuilt explicit fear of death. In fact, I try and explicitly make myself think about death more than I naturally do, because I think it's helpful for rearranging certain priorities and stuff in your life. So for a while I had the classic, the background of my laptop and stuff would be skulls, these sort of memento mori type of signals in your life to remind you that, like, you will die someday, and do you want to spend your time being angry about some very minor slight that someone gave you at the superstore today? Probably not. There are important things to be concerned about in the world and less important things, and you should just focus on the important things. So I have to actively prod myself to think about death more, because it is such a non-existent feature. And even when I think about it, it's not in a fearful way. It's not as if I'm scared of dying. It's more just I'm trying to get my priorities aligned. So yeah, very, very much like you on that front.
I think I could get there. I think I could get scared of it if I.
Let's get you there.
But it's what you just said then runs. I think Winnie, the chemist, she tests the DeLillo drug. I'm not sure if we should say now.
We'll get to that later.
Yet,
we'll get to that. But she has a theory of death anxiety as well. Well, not so much death anxiety, but she says one benefit of thinking about death is this kind of what you're saying, to bring more meaning into life. I kind of get that's the whole memento mori Buddhist thing. I feel like there's a slight tension with that idea and like the Aubrey de Grey type stuff of like solving death or solving aging is a problem. And then does that make life less meaningful if death is, or thinking about death is what brings meaning to it? And maybe that's what people think. When you talk about like solving aging and solving death, like a lot of people are a bit squirmish about that. Like, well, yeah, kind of want to die. Do you want to die now? It's like, no, but want to die at some point. But anyway. So, Rich, how about you?
You guys are tripping, man. You're just so deep in denial about this. Like, I just don't even believe you. Like, come on, you're gonna not exist.
Maybe now that you're a father.
No, I've always been terrified of death since I can remember.
Oh, really?
Since I was 5.
You're gonna non-exist. The world will go on for infinity or near infinity without you, and you're gone. This is your one shot.
It's not only that the party stops, it's that the party keeps going on.
Yeah. FOMO. It's the ultimate FOMO. But I don't feel it. It doesn't cause me like psychic agony because it's so hard to think about. Like, even if I try and think about it, it's so horrifying that my mind just sort of like skitters off of it. Like, I can't even inhabit that fear for long because it's just my own sense of my own immortality, my, incredible weapons grade cope just kicks back in and rescues me. To be clear, like, I'm terrified of death, and I think death is a bad thing, and all the standard stock responses about it gives your life meaning are total bullshit. But I also sleep easily at night and never think about it. I reckon if you get a terminal diagnosis or you're just old, it's going to be harder to avoid thinking about it. And I wouldn't be surprised if my fear of death becomes more present at some point in the future. So let's go through some of those copes real quick, because Murray's got this good list of them, which I thought was quite fun. And I want to see if you guys agree or disagree, since you are not afraid of death. So you must have a cope. I want to find out what your particular copes are and then dismantle them so that you can come and join me.
Quickly, speaking of cope, my partner knows someone who's young with a terminal diagnosis, like sort of our age, and he's in total denial around it. And like, it's going to happen any day now or any week.
Damn.
And it's like, he's literally thinks everything's fine and he's going to survive, and right to the end. Yeah.
Jesus.
So it's just, there's a strong denial of death impulse, at least in this person. It's like the strongest I've ever heard about, really. So the ultimate Murrayism. So what are some of the Murray's copes, Rich?
So one of them is that once you've accomplished enough, if you've accomplished enough in your life, then that's the main thing. That the fear of death is sort of subsidiary to that. Basically, you've got FOMO, you've got things you want to tick off. If you tick them off, no worries. And Murray's response is like, are you crazy? Would you ask a man who bags groceries if he fears death? Not because it is death, but because there are still some interesting groceries he would like to bag. I don't want death to tarry a while so I can write a monograph. I want it to go away for 70 or 80 years. So agree or disagree?
Yeah, as long as they're meaningful things. Of course, not packing grocery bags. But I could imagine, and there might even be a successful kind of family line, but more at peace with dying after feeling like you've lived a well-lived life, compared to not having done that. I can imagine being more at peace with that. I can imagine still, it wouldn't completely cure it though. I mean, maybe it would. Maybe people are at peace with that. But
the big confounder here is like, once you get to that point where you've ticked off whatever your life goals are, you've had a good career, you've got a loving family or something, you're retired, all of your capabilities are shrinking. And so there's just not that much more you can do anyway. And it's happening like at the same time you're leveling off gradually. It's usually not a sudden cliff, although there are some abrupt jumps downwards. So you're like, it's hard to imagine day by day that you could be doing otherwise anyway. But if we changed it so it's like you have the mind and body of a 30-year-old indefinitely, when would be the day when you'd be like, oh, now I want to die? Do you think it would magically come when you turn 80, but you're still got the mind and body of a 30-year-old? I simply do not buy that whatsoever. It doesn't matter if you've had a great career and got kids and so on. It's like, why wouldn't you want to get up again the next morning?
It's more like life's not worth living for old people. Yeah.
It's getting more marginal, yeah.
Yeah. Maybe take 27 rather than 30. But
This is peak cam bod.
yeah, well, it's
Cam's
peak
like-
fluid intelligence.
Oh, you should have seen me back then.
Yeah.
Well, it's not like it's peak for everyone. It's peak for the average person at 27, right? So for you, it could be 35. Who knows?
Imagine peak fluid intelligence, and then you're just stacking up that crystal intelligence with all your antis and stuff. Holy shit, what a weapon. And imagine like still being able to drink and party with almost no repercussions. And oh man. All right, a couple more quick copes. Doesn't our knowledge of death make life more precious?
So that's Benny's one, right? That's on his laptop screen in his morning. He says,
I wanted to say this earlier, actually. Like, I think this is a total non sequitur by people who just aren't understanding the nuances of what's going on here. Like, you can simultaneously recognize that currently you can use like a bad event in your life that will probably happen to you, like death, to sort out your priorities day to day, and simultaneously want to push death farther and farther away or try and eliminate it altogether, right? Those are not incompatible at all. So I don't even buy that this is a feasible cope. I don't think anyone's doing this. I don't think. Yeah, I don't really even understand this criticism. Oh, I'm saying you could have fear of death and still work towards death ending, right? I don't understand how those are mutually incompatible.
So answer this question, Benny. A person has to be told he's going to die before he can begin to live life to the fullest. True or false?
False.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then why do you do your memento moris and stuff?
Oh, because it's still an excellent motivator. It's not perhaps the only motivator, but it is a good motivator. Just replace death with the word ending, right? So suppose, like, I don't know, I'm going to die, but suppose, like, I'm told your relationship with, the book club's going to end at some point.
makes every episode with you guys far more special.
Yeah, exactly. Means I have to deal with Cam's shitty jokes, for only finitely many times.
But just think, you might not have him forever.
And so,
Cam, you got something you want to tell us, buddy? The ass has gone downhill.
So, does that mean that that's the only way to appreciate the book club is thinking about its ending? No, but that is one way to realize, like, we probably won't do this forever. So you should probably enjoy it in the moment.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the difference is that you're not arguing that death is a good thing or that endings are a good thing. You're simply saying they are at this point in time inevitable, and therefore you could use them as a source of motivation, but without saying that death is in some sense good, like a net positive, or that endings are a net positive.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it would be, say we eliminated death. I think the question of meaning would be a very interesting one that as a culture we'd have to figure out how to solve. Because I think a lot of people do use death as a source of meaning, and that's not bad while it is an inevitable part of our life. And that doesn't mean we should not work towards ending it. Once we have ended it, assuming that is feasible, then we'll just need more cultural technology to figure out how to lead good, infinite lives. So, yeah.
Yep. Makes sense to me.
And so are the other copes like religion, right? That's one of them?
Yeah, I think we were going to preface this. Benny, do you want to talk a little bit about Becker's stuff on the denial of death? Because I think reading this book, it's clear to me that Don DeLillo surely must have read that book, or I'd be amazed if he didn't, or there's some incredible sort of synchronicity going on, because it's like a fictionalized account of the thesis, I think, which I'd like to get out on the table.
Yeah, so that's what I thought at first as well, and now I'm actually not convinced of that thesis anymore. But let me just introduce some of Becker's stuff so we can get into it. So I haven't actually read Becker's famous Denial of Death book, which I guess came out in the 70s, maybe? Does anyone know?
Yeah.
70s, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I'm sure that cloud will go right by us.
So he wrote The Denial of Death, and his main thesis is that humans have this authentic anxiety of death, and we do things both individually and culturally to mitigate that fear of death. And for him, it's not necessarily always a bad thing. There are, of course, unhealthy ways to react to this information, but this is also results in huge cultural achievements on our end. So like lots of the monuments we build, both physical monuments and intellectual monuments in terms of intellectual achievements and wanting to discover things about the world, and so that your descendants remember your name, and to do great things, build great companies, build great products.
Podcasts that will live on in history.
Yeah, exactly. Podcasts that will live on someone's web server forever. All of this can be traced back to this sort of primitive fear of death that we're carrying around with us. And we're engaged in these sorts of activities as a substitute for some sort of immortality, right? So we've sort of recognized that we can't have physical immortality. So we're trying to gain immortality in name or deed, or in sort of these other ways.
It reminds me of that Woody Allen joke. He says, I don't want to achieve immortality through my work. I want to achieve immortality through not dying.
Yes, my man. Yeah, I'm on team Woody Allen on this one.
So why I asked you guys the question earlier about whether death is authentic in these characters, or rather the fear of death is authentic in these characters, or whether it sort of comes culturally prepackaged, was precisely getting at the question of to what extent DeLillo's book is a fictionalized account of Becker's thesis, right? So Becker's thesis, again, sort of relies on this like authentic fear of death, and then examines how we spend a lot of time trying to achieve things in our life to mitigate this fear of death. White Noise, I'm leaning a bit more towards the reading that like even the fear of death isn't necessarily authentic. It's also packaged via culture. So, for instance, what we were just talking about in terms of Jack's interaction with this Simuvac attendant, right? There, he's sort of being told how to fear death. Like, okay, now you should be worried. Why exactly you should be worried, we're not sure, but God damn it, you should be worried now, right? Yeah, it feels like fear in DeLillo's world is sort of like itself a cultural product, and it's just like manufactured and sort of distributed like everything else, like shows on the news they're watching, or like academic departments and stuff. So,
in one sense, it's obviously just fictionalized, quite clear characterization of Becker's thesis, right? So it's like, Gladney is totally encompassed by this fear of death. It's like the one thing he's not fully honest to his wife about, and then it turns out that she also is totally motivated by this fear of death. She loves her husband, but the one thing that's greater than that is her fear of death, and she'll do things to jeopardize that love. Maybe that's cultural influence as well, but it's certainly their strongest driving force of their actions.
But we need to make the case for the primality, I think, which the obvious argument which Becker is focused on, which justifies his belief, right, is that humans are a different kind of a thing to the other animals, because uniquely, probably, we know that we're going to die. So he has that great line about humans are both a worm and food for worms, or something like that. So our self-consciousness is what sort of dooms us, because we are like elevated above all the other animals with our towering intellects and majesty and achievements. But we also have this cursed knowledge that like nothing else has, and which maybe doesn't faze you guys, but which certainly phases a lot of people, or perhaps does phase you subconsciously on some level that you're not aware of. So that's the primal argument, and I find that compelling. I think you're right, though, that a lot of it is also amplified or exacerbated by cultural messaging. But like, he thinks that the great project of human culture is the opposite of that. It's suppressing it and trying to distract ourselves from it, and trying to achieve some kind of like symbolic immortality. Even though, or literal if you're religious and think the afterlife is true. But the primal argument's right there.
For Becker, you're saying, though, but not necessarily DeLillo.
I'm sure DeLillo is riffing on, I mean, he's got a passage in here about imagining, who was the king of the Huns? Was it Attila or someone?
Yeah.
He's got a passage riffing where he says, like, Attila did not look through the opening in his tent and gesture at some lame dog standing at the edge of the fire, saying, that pathetic, flea-ridden beast is better off than the greatest ruler of men. I want to believe he was not afraid. So, yeah, I think he is making that argument. So, like, of the various attempts to achieve symbolic immortality, procreation is the most obvious one, right? So to live beyond your own death, you pass on your genes, you have some like biological continuity. And again, I think that doesn't require any complicated cultural argument. That's actually hardwired in as it happens. And then in this book, like Wilder, the 2-year-old, is like envied by all because he is so young. He is basically pre-conscious. He is not aware of his own death, his own impending death. And the other characters are like so jealous of that. And there's that big set piece when he's so oblivious that he like rides his tricycle across a busy highway and all the adults are just like freaking out. And he just doesn't even, he doesn't even realize why he should be concerned. And he just merrily cycles across and miraculously nothing happens. And every time, I think Babette in particular finds Wilder to be like a huge source of comfort and solace because of being in the presence of someone who has no fear of death, and B, I think because, you know, it feels comforted in some sense by having living descendants who will allow her in some sense to live beyond her own lifetime, which I think is actually a pretty good cope, one of the better ones, and one that maybe has subconsciously influenced me. But yeah, also like since having a child, the main difference for me is that I relate to Jack and Babette's discussions of like who should die first, where now I really want to die first.
Wink, wink.
No, I mean like before my wife, that would be bad, but before my child, my daughter, no, I really want to die before that. And so I fear something more than my own death now, which is interesting, which is a new position to be in. It's technically still a fear of death, I guess, but at least it's not my own death.
Yeah.
Or I just have a whole nother fear added onto the basic fear.
I imagine that in this book, though, if Jack had said that himself, it would be a lie. And Jack is just totally, like, it wouldn't have trumped his fear of his own death, would be my guess.
Were you guys saying that Jack and Babette were lying about wanting to die first?
Yeah, I thought that explicitly, even when he said it at the start, so that when they were sort of speaking sweet nothings to each other and reading each other erotic fiction, and I'm just thinking now, and she's talking about how pleasure it pleases her to give him pleasure. It was the other kind of social mediated thing, but yeah, like he says, I want to die for you, and then he sort of says to the reader, hell no, like that's like his worst fear, I think. I'm not sure if she's also lying. Maybe we should talk around your next point around another potential cope with this sort of technological salvation. Which was Babette, the wife's ultimate, attempted solution.
Yeah. So let's talk about Baudrillard a bit, which is a big component of the book. And as you were saying, Babette has this fear of death, so much so that she went out of her way to try and find a company who could fix the fear of death with chemicals by giving her certain pills that she would take. It was a very experimental trial with possibly extremely worrying side effects. And as we'll see, there actually were worrying side effects. One of them being that you start to not be able to tell the difference between reality and just words, people saying things. So there are some funny scenes at the end where someone who's taking a lot of Baudrillard, someone just says to them, the plane is going down, and they're sitting in their chair and they, start covering their head and get into the safety crouch position. And so, she's willing to put all of these side effects aside just to get her hands on this pill that can sort of cure her of her fear.
And she even lies about it to her husband, and to get the pill agrees to sleep with the person who can provide the pill because it's the only way to get it, because she fears death so much.
Yeah, and then maybe it's worth I actually thought the ending of the book went on too long.
Yeah, it was weaker.
It was weaker, and it was just overly long. So the last part of the book was actually about the second half of the book. because the airborne toxic event actually didn't last too long in terms of page number. But, the last part of the book is sort of more satire in terms of just more conversations between Jack and Murray about various things at the supermarket and at the college and stuff, none of which I found particularly new. Like, I didn't think it added anything to the story beyond what we'd already seen in the first part. The big plot unraveling is that Jack becomes obsessed with this guy who Babette had slept with to get her hands on the Dilar, and she kept telling him to forget about it. It doesn't matter, it's sort of not happening anymore. But he can't get this guy out of his head. And his father-in-law at one point had given him this little handgun that he doesn't know what to do with, because he's just this liberal academic who's never shot or carried a gun in his life. But he starts carrying this thing around with him. Again, possibly something interesting there about what norms and social pressure from others can do to you. So someone tells him you probably should be carrying this gun around, and then a couple pages later we find that he is in fact carrying the gun around. But he basically goes in search of the guy that Babette had slept with, who was providing her the Dilar, and he had this plan to go in, kill him, and then plant the gun in his hand and make it look like a suicide and leave. And he ends up going in. He talks to him for a bit. He shoots him twice in the gut, I believe, and then tries to put the gun in his hand, or succeeds in putting the gun in the dying man's hands. But he takes a shot at Jack's wrist and injures him a little bit. And for perhaps a variety of reasons at that point, Jack feels like he can't actually go ahead with the murder. So he sort of drags him out across the parking lot to his car and goes in search of a hospital and saves his life, and has some interesting death-oriented conversations with the
German nuns.
the German nuns that I guess are also acting as maids and nurses and doctors at the hospital. So ends up not killing him, I guess. We sort of are led to suspect that this man survives. I forget his name. Do you guys remember the name of the guy that he shoots?
Mr. Gray, I think.
No, but isn't it Mick Willie or something? He actually
Willie Mink.
Oh, right.
But Mr. Gray was Babette's name for this person to not think about it. And before, when Jack was getting paranoid about him, it's you couldn't picture a crystallized man. I think even one point he described it was a feeling of white noise in his head, was conception of this person that he became obsessed about. And he also, I think, uses white noise as this description of death that he's also anxious about.
Yeah. So I actually don't have much to say about this part. I thought the pursuit of the drug Dilar was interesting, and the fact that Babette really wanted to take this drug despite the bad side effects, and just the whole, I guess, meditation on trying to circumvent death via technology and stuff. But in terms of how that plot sort of unraveled here, I wasn't particularly invested, nor do I really feel like I understand Jack's choice at the end to save this guy instead of just letting him die in the motel. I'm not sure how well that was motivated. Perhaps I just missed something that happened there, but I didn't feel like I really got inside his head. So I don't know if you guys have anything to say here. There's a couple interesting conversations that he had with the German nuns that we should perhaps touch on.
Well, they're pretending, right? They don't believe. Yeah, they don't actually believe in a religion or God themselves, and and one other thing as well is, before all this happens, when Jack's talking to Murray around all Murray's different copes, another example was this sort of dichotomy that he brings up of the killer or the dyer, and becoming a killer yourself can be this way to escape death or to transcend death. If you kind of stare it in your face and kill others, and that kind of convinces Jack, along with kind of jealousy, to go kill this person, and then he ends up being a saver, perhaps, as another way to transcend death anxiety somehow as well.
Let me try and make this make sense for you, Benny, because I think it actually is quite good storytelling. The ending is ambiguous, but it is sort of consistent. So if you think about Jack, his arc throughout the book is basically failing at all of these attempts to achieve his immortality project in succession, right? So it starts off with his career as a Hitler studies professor, which he is sort of deeply insecure about because he can't speak German. And he realizes that that is not buying him the kind of status and immortality that would allow him to feel good about the prospect of dying. The biological cope, he's got 4 kids or however many kids, that hasn't worked for him. He's got a lovely family that hasn't worked for him. And then when Babette gets on Dyla, like, Jack becomes way more obsessive about it than Babette even was. Like, his main motive at first is he wants it for himself. Like, that's a huge part of why he's so insistent on doing all this sleuthing to figure out what the hell is going on, because this is like a dream drug for him. This is like the miracle that will the next thing that will save him while everything else hasn't. And then that devastatingly doesn't work. That's just some bullshit snake oil. And then the killing thing is the only thing left to try, which, yeah, as you say, Cam, is motivated by Murray's theorizing, but which has been foreshadowed by, what was the name of the lady chemist? The
Winnie.
Winnie.
Confusingly similar to Willie Mink.
Yeah, so Winnie says, she lays out her theory of why people are scared of death, and then she says, perhaps you need to make death more familiar or less surprising, which maybe in the olden days when death is just a more ever-present part of life, perhaps like counterintuitively it's actually less terrifying because it's so commonplace and normal. Everyone's probably lost half their kids, before the age of 5 kind of thing. But that leads to Murray saying that, yeah, you can become the killer and you can sort of mete out death yourself. And I think that would be a way to make death your bitch, basically, right? Like, you are the one who dispenses it. So the reason why Jack's failure to kill Mr. White is significant is that he's failed again. Like, he still can't fucking do it. He's tried the ultimate thing and he's got the guy there. He's shot him twice. He's dying. He can't even let him bleed out. So Jack is the negative way, or I don't know, one reading of this is that Jack is just a failure the whole way through this entire book. His all of his attempts to become a master of death are futile the whole way through. And this is not a redemptive arc, because at first I was like, oh, I guess it's kind of good that he saved him and he's showing that he can overcome his bad impulses or something. But I think it's worse than that. I think he just is still a failure right until the very end.
Nice.
And then perhaps it's good that he's forced to acknowledge how futile all of this is, and maybe that leaves him a better person. But I think in the last few pages, it still seems like he still has not managed to escape this, and this is going to be a lifetime burden upon him. Yeah, so does that satisfy you a little bit better, Benny, of why it went through that progression?
Yeah, I think it does. That's a very nice thesis. I still stand by the point that I think the novel could have been shorter, maybe by 100 pages or something at the end there. But I think that is a nice character arc, or rather, I guess, lack of an arc, in the sense that he's not solving his problems and continually being foiled. But I do like that perspective on it. Yeah, that's very nice.
Somewhat unsatisfying, perhaps, because, I don't know, this novel feels to me like descriptive in a fun and interesting way, but not containing any good prescriptions. And also, like, as far as I can tell, a lot more nihilistic than Becker was about this stuff, where everything in here is being lampooned. There's no positive thing to cling on to. Because I think Becker was a bit more optimistic about channeling this kind of energy in productive directions, and that, I don't know, like, I kind of think you can achieve a quasi-immortality through your actions. Like, everyone can to some degree. And I do find that comforting, and I think if you play the right games, it can be positive sum and so on. But you don't really get that in this book, so it's kind of a downer ending.
I couldn't tell if this book was sympathetic towards religion being a kind of salvation towards it, because Murray mentions it to Jack as a potential option. There's religion, and then Jack points out that the problem with that is he can't believe in it himself. He's in this double bind where he can't believe. But it sounded to me like perhaps it would be a salvation otherwise. We just live in this secular world with, all the new atheist arguments as part of our serial, that it's very hard for us to make that jump. But, if we lived in a culture that didn't have that, that would perhaps be a salvation. But even in this world, even the nuns pretend. I mean, that seems to be David Foster Wallace seems to make that conclusion, something like that. I mean, not so much around death anxiety, but just around kind of meaning. I suppose is one of the few things you can grab onto.
Yeah, I read that as him just like kneecapping yet another popular cope, which he doesn't spend a lot of time on, but it's like, yeah, guess what? Religion's not going to do it either. Even the religious don't really believe.
Yeah, no, I think it was doing that. It's no longer an option for us. But I wasn't sure if he was saying, and that's kind of a criticism of our current secular world, where we no longer have that. We live in this, this kind of media consumerist, nihilistic secular world, which isn't good for us. There's another moment. So how you just mentioned how Winnie the chemist said one method is to focus on death and be exposed to it. I remember at one point, I think Jack and Henrik, they're witnessing a fire of the psych ward, I think, and I think there's a woman, there's a patient that her gown's on fire, and I think he's finding it quite moving at first, and then you can smell the burning of polystyrene, and the stench is too strong that they can no longer witness it. And there's something like that around like this fake plastic, technology now has even corrupted death. Even the reality of death, which is meant to be this personal and spiritual thing, has now been changed, like in our current world. And I can imagine other ways that, social media and stuff would impact the experience of losing someone. So like he wasn't even able to expose himself to death in that sense in our current world.
Yeah.
By the way, I have 20 mins.
Yeah, so I mean, let's just wrap it up. Like overall, what'd you guys think here? Did you like it?
Rich, does it still get a silver star? Silver star your stop, or is it your second? Do you have some gold star books, or just silver?
I've got gold star and silver star. Everything else is like presumed bronze, I guess, and I get rid of anything I don't like. But man, I'm gone on a real journey on this one, boys, because I was silver star. I was like, yeah, this is a good book, and then I was like, it's a bit too cute. It didn't stand up to the reread very well. And then you guys bring in Baudrillard and thinking more carefully about what is salvageable from Pomo stuff. I was like, actually, this is way more nuanced than I thought it was. It's not just a generic consumerism bad type novel of the period. It's more clever than that. Now I'm circling back around and I'm like, I don't actually know if I like this book all that much. It's kind of like didactic as well. Because, Murray just like explained all of these things through their dialogues.
Poor Rich is in trouble. Bit of exposition, bit of theory coming from the voice.
Why did he want to kill the guy? Oh, well, Murray says in a three-page exchange exactly why he might want to try that. In theory, of course.
Yeah. A lot of the dialogue felt inauthentic, right? They're talking about these ideas between each other, but it didn't feel like natural dialogue that would happen.
No, I mean, yeah, every character in this book talks the same in completely fake and like non-real ways, which I think is okay because it's not trying to be a realist book. It's a silly satire, but it's still not what I personally love. It is pretty funny, but the jokes didn't land quite as well on the second time around. And it has the problem of like, whenever I read, like last time I read this, I had the same thought that if you read David Foster Wallace first, you're poisoned by having him in your mind and you think this is like a cheap knockoff of David Foster Wallace, which is totally unfair because it's the other way around, that the inspiration goes in the other direction. But nevertheless, I think this is like a worse version of of David Foster Wallace. Cam?
Yeah, I mean, similar to you. It was kind of fun to read, I think, at least for that middle third. The Airborne Toxic event was fun. And, kind of this mini little thriller. I think I read it at the right time. I was already starting to see some value in the big soup of seemingly valueless postmodern BS. And when I started reading this, I started thinking more and more around this kind of how much things are fake and psyops and stuff. So I like that. I like the book. I'd recommend the book. And yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, it directly influences Wallace. So if you're a Wallace fan, I think it's worth checking this out. I think he often cites as probably his primary contemporary influence.
Is that right?
Yeah, I think as he was reading Infinite Jest, he was reading DeLillo's Underworld, which was kind of DeLillo's other big magnus opus, which is really big. They were kind of reading it at the same time and influencing each other, I think. But yeah, I mean, it's harder to see in this book exactly what I saw snippets around some things. Obviously, feeling like the barn, most photocopy barn feels like it could be something out of Jest. And I suppose this idea of TV feels very Wallacean. And when Murray starts waxing lyrical around the spiritual nature of TV and the whole world is kind of refactored because of TV, which now we think of in terms of the internet age, so it's kind of a book of its time, as is Infinite Jest, but it feels even more true of how refactored reality is now with social media, right? And people say online is not real life, but online is real life now. It directly influences real life.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I enjoyed the reading experience. I think I'm still a bit confused about my interpretation. And I think I sort of vomited that confusion throughout the episode, so I won't relitigate it too much. But I think the basics are just that I'm not sure how committed he is, or rather, I should say, I'm not sure how committed the book is to the thesis that everything is like reality is totally fake and socially mediated, and that there's no sort of like base layer there, like the true sort of postmodern critique, and to what extent it's saying that there is a base layer, but we've sort of lost that because everything has become a product, basically. And then you start to slip into just how much of this is, like Rich was saying at the beginning, how much of this is just a funny but somewhat shallow critique of late stage capitalism and whatnot. And I think, Rich was saying at the beginning of the app that he sort of moved away from that reading. And it's funny because I think I've almost moved more towards that reading as I've thought about it more. And we actually didn't talk about it that much here, but like I do think a lot of this can just be seen. I think you could frame a lot of this in terms of like commentary on everything being a product and how that relates to consumerism and capitalism and whatnot. And I resist those kind of readings because, one, especially now, in the last like 5 or 10 years, those have become so common that, it's exhausting to some extent. And so, yeah, I resist that a bit, but I can't help getting pulled towards that as I think about it more and more. And so that's sort of disappointing. I would still recommend this book to people, I think, especially as like a book that is really of its genre and maybe set the tone for a genre for the next 10 or 20 years. I'm not exactly sure what my takeaways are yet. So hopefully they become a little more firm.
I think it was a big book at the time. Like, it was like a bestseller and put DeLillo on the map.
It won some big gong, didn't it? Like the National Book Award or something?
Yeah, and you could no longer see it as the book it was before that award.
Yeah, exactly. the most awarded book.
Yeah. Which happens, right, when a book gets an award.
Yeah. There's a whole lens of criticism that you could have on the book club about that, right? Where it's like, we're only reading books that have been praised by at least some corner of the literary culture. And like, what is that doing to our actual interpretation of all of these works? The fact that we know that other people, esteem them really highly. And, I know we're trying to escape that by, we try and shit on books if we really didn't like them, but no doubt that's influencing our interpretations to some extent.
I disagree with that, but at the risk of going on.
Yeah, let's call it here.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of fence sitting from all three of us. A lot of wishy-washy, or maybe I should say a lot of nuanced, carefully considered views on the novel.
It's 350 pages. There's a lot of ideas in it.
It's fun to read, right?
It's fun to read.
You chuckle, you smile at a bunch of lines. It is cute, both in the good sense as well.
All right, what are we doing next, Cam? What's the next book?
So next week we're doing The Dispossessed by Ursula Le Guin or Le Guin.
Oh shit! I thought we were doing Atomized. I didn't even realize. Okay, I better get it.
I thought we were doing Ursula Le Guin.
Yeah. Or atomize. We'll see. We're doing. Yeah. We're going to read The Dispossessed by Ursula Le Guin. A lot of people know this book. It's very famous, so I probably don't have to introduce it too much.
No, what is it? What's the book? Come on. Why are we doing it?
Why we're doing it? I think we wanted to do some sci-fi, right? With sci-fi with some ideas. I haven't actually read much Le Guin. I've read her short stories. I've read the one who walked away from Omelas, which would be a great episode, but I feel like everyone's read it. Yeah, so this one's about anarchy, right? Or do you guys not know much about it?
I don't know. I don't know anything.
I have no idea.
This is so bad.